Well, this season certainly flew by, and looking at the aftermath, it was certainly a strange one. It's been a good number of years since I've seen such a clear stratification between what's good, bad, and okay, with the shows that stood out being exceptional by far. But look at me, getting ahead of myself when I've not even given my obligatory plug and disclaimer. This isn't a comprehensive review of every show out this season, but a bookend of my preview, where I give my thoughts after having seen as much of the shows as I could stomach that I covered in that. Want me to cover something else? You can toss me a buck on Patreon and cast a vote next season. And if you're looking to stay up to date on content from me, why not hit the subscribe button? So with that out of the way, let's dive on in. The shows that stood out were by far some of the best that seasonal anime has had on offer in a long time. Action, sci-fi, rom-com, and some that expertly delved into a number of genres, setting the bar incredibly high this time around. Let's dig into the main course, shall we? As I mentioned, there was stiff competition this season, and some were real contenders for my top tier shows period. Heavenly Delusion was on that list to be sure. This was an anime that drips with atmosphere, a strong narrative, and themes of adolescence and gender identity. The story for this one packed action, mystery, and sci-fi into a tight package that blew my expectations away. The cast are all likable, well-rounded, and relatable, while not feeling bogged down by the heavy themes and atmosphere the entire time, leaving this with both lows and highs for the audience. It's been a while since a post-apocalyptic anime has engaged me so well, as most just have it as a backdrop rather than an actual character. Older generations clinging to the old way of life, while for the younger ones, this is all they've ever known. Feeding this whole coming into your own as a person motif throughout this series. And that's praiseworthy enough, that it has a good story and a strong message. But that mixed with incredible animation and visual storytelling creates a masterclass in anime that we've not seen in a long time. Each episode feels like a movie in of itself, contributing to an overall experience in a way that just gets viewers excited because it's epic. The scope, design, and even how those interact with the characters adds to the charm. Heavenly Delusion was an amazing entry this season, and definitely worth a watch. My love story with Yamada-kun at level 999 was a charming series, with not entirely realistic characters, but it didn't shy away from portraying them in a more awkward light. It lets the uncomfortable air of a socially uninterested introvert who sucks at conversation and an outgoing ditz hang around, so you really get into the heads of these characters, and that informed why they gravitate towards one another, creating a believable relationship that isn't trope-riddled like so many others. I'm tired of the popular cute girl everyone loves secretly being an otaku, so it was nice to see the main girl here picked up the hobby first and is learning through her friends that she makes in the series. I also like how it lets the romantic moments breathe without interrupting them for comedy, undercutting the message. These reasons are what makes it stand out as a good rom-com in my opinion, and one of the better ones out in recent memory. The animation was simplistic, but it worked well for what it was conveying, emphasizing the cute, fluffier side of the cast in situations, while creating an inviting feeling that made it relaxing and comfortable to watch, while not skimping on the more artistic shot choices and direction, demonstrating an effort in how it came together. If you're looking for a solid rom-com this season, this is certainly worth picking up. Wow, we're really rolling into the third season of Dr. Stone. I don't know if anyone's surprised I'm ranking it so highly because every time a new season comes out, I always end up praising it endlessly, but this one definitely ranked higher than the second. The reason being, after the internal affairs crap has finally been settled with Tsukasa, we're now back to dealing with the real plot of the series. Yeah, this arc starts to tackle the whole why people turn to stone thing, and I like the direction because it unfolds like a mystery, something to discover in a world we're unfamiliar with. Dr. Stone is one of the best shonen series to hit in recent years, because it's unlike others in the market, with a heavy emphasis on problem solving and creative solutions, and embracing science as something cool that has practical applications. So yeah, not your typical battle series like so many others. If you haven't seen the first 2 seasons or prelude OVA to this one, check it out, because you're definitely missing out. The second season of Tonikaku Kawaii probably falls a bit short of the first in terms of enjoyability, but not by much. It packed the same humor I enjoyed from the first season, just more of it, with an ever-expanding cast that introduced some much-needed variety to the series. But I think why I'm a little soft on this outing was the core dynamic of the married couple still acting like they're in a typical rom-com situation, while everyone around them points out that they're married only keeps the laughs rolling for a short time. Either way, if you liked the first season like I did, the second was a welcome continuation. The cast is cute, as always, the right mixture of awkward and bold that keeps the audience guessing, and jokes that play off expectations rather than outright subvert them. As for the animation, it's the same bright, simplistic, but fluffy style the series is known for. It meshed well enough that I doubt anyone would even realize it's a second season at all, and not just a straight up continuation of the first. Rom-coms are a dime a dozen in this market, and this one stands out as a series that actually allows the comedy to flow from and into the romance between the two leads, and it's why I'll always recommend people check it out. You know, I'm getting a little tired of talking about Kimetsu no Yaiba at this point, but here we go again. Since I'm speaking about the anime adaptation, understand Ufotable carries this franchise hard, as the story this season isn't exactly the strongest. Hell, I think it's one of the weakest arcs in the manga, as nothing really new is introduced for the majority of it, pretty much just at the beginning and very end. Tanjiro's growth isn't really organic, and it's here he feels his most shonen protagonisty, though the end of the arc is what's really important. Well, aside from the cool fights that fill up most of the runtime, it's worth watching, because this is a glimpse of how the stronger demons have stayed alive for so long, and how the upper ranks have their own quirks, making their fights part puzzle rather than just straightforward power battles. But the animation this season was still top notch, though not as internet breaking as it has been in previous seasons, so we'll split the difference. It still ranks high. If you're looking for a solid shonen series, check out Kimetsu no Yaiba. It's one of the better picks currently out, and that's saying something, considering how well shonen anime has been doing lately. Kimi wa Houkago Insomnia stood out to me due to its likable cast, simple but solid premise, and overall good presentation. We had a lot of rom-coms, but few had their leads click as much as they did in this series. Now, it wasn't perfect. The cast becomes a bit bloated as the anime goes on, distracting from the most engaging part of the story. I'd have liked it more if they spent longer on the core premise of the two kids bonding over their shared sleeping issues, but in the end what we did get was still an enjoyable slice of life with romantic tensions. Why this one worked so well is I found the leads different enough from the usual tropes that they stood out. One's a quirky, bubbly girl who has friends, and the other isn't exactly a loner, but more of an introvert who enjoys his own interests and doesn't let people's opinions drag him down. In a series like this, lives or dies on how vivid the characters are, so I was pleased. Especially after seeing how much mobility the relationship here had, as it's clear they're together because they bring out the best aspects of one another. The art direction and animation for this series were a bit better than the average television anime, and that gives this a leg up as well. Strong cinematography carries this anime a long way, giving it a more artistic and motivated feel than the source implies. Overall, this is one of the better slice-of-life romance stories out this season, because it felt more alive than the others. Oh wow, if you didn't expect Oshi no Ko to make my recommendations, you've clearly been living under a rock. This series isn't looking to just be my top pick of the season, or hell, even the year, but quickly working its way into my top anime of all time. I don't think it's a surprise the Japanese entertainment industry is shitty. There's a lot of anime out there about just how shady and jaded it is, but this series nailed it in a way that most others haven't. Not just saying, hey, this is a sleazy industry, but showing the sheer lack of remorse and how those running it view their young talent strictly in terms of profit and marketability. Now that's the theme for a murder mystery show centered around hunting down a popular idol's killer through unorthodox methods. I won't say there's much unique about this series, but how it pulls things that have been done before into a tight package with such purpose easily makes it a masterclass in storytelling, mixing proper drama, romance, fluff, and mystery. It has a strong motif that motivates its dark plot while not ignoring the lives of its core cast, so the whole thing feels a lot more complete. And that's not even touching on the art direction and animation, which, honestly, let's face it, makes this thing feel like a movie at times. Ignoring that the first episode was actually released theatrically, Togokoba went to town on this adaptation, and poured their hearts and souls into a series that drips with style and atmosphere in almost every scene, showing the highs and lows in striking ways that make a lasting impression on the audience. If you're not watching Oshi no Ko this season, go correct that mistake, and jump into a modern classic. Next up, we're looking at the shows that landed in the middle of the road. These aren't bad, and I'm sure you'll get some enjoyment out of them. But for me, there was one thing or another that held these back from greatness. Basically, these are conditional recommendations. So let's dig on in. I Got a Cheat Skill in Another World was pretty bad on all accounts. A fairly generic isekai setup mixed with an extra dose of wish fulfillment where the protagonist gets to flaunt his amazing powers in his original world too? Yeah, hot garbage. So why is it all the way up here? Well, when isekais are bad, they end up in two camps. So awful I just end up dropping them, or junk food that's entertaining enough to keep watching. Yeah, I'll give you one guess where this ended up. This show isn't so over the top or absurd it's hilarious, but it's certainly mind-numbingly bland enough, mixed more with our world than Isekai to give it a somewhat creative edge. As a guy who has fantasy world powers and magic just decides to become a Chad in real life, he's not abusing his gifts, and honestly is obnoxiously humble to the point it makes everyone drool over him. But I guess that's part of the entertainment here, is how straight-faced it plays its story. In my preview, I was a bit concerned with how the studio would handle it, because millipensi gonna millipensi, and I guess I was surprised. Note that is different than impressed. Compared to their other works, it's not laughably bad, but it's still steeped in their trademark laziness, by using a ton of close-ups and post-production movements to amp up the visuals. I'm sure it sounds like I'm pretty hard on this, and I am, because, well, it's not great, but it was an isekai I watched each week without the desire to drop it, because while stupid, it was still engaging. My Home Hero shares a lot of its issues with the last entry on this list, but rather than junk food, this series felt hampered by its lack of faith from its studio and direction. In terms of it being a drama and thriller, it succeeded well and gets points for being anything but the typical anime. An entirely grounded story with a pretty pathetic main character whose entire drive is to protect his family from the trouble he got them wrapped up in when he killed his daughter's abusive boyfriend. And now he has a criminal organization following his every move. It was a deep story that kept the audience guessing on where it would go, as it wove characters and plots together to create a magnetic narrative, with plenty of twists and near misses that'll make you care about how the cast is gonna get through this, and hell, even sympathize with some of the mobsters. However, the lackluster animation and art direction makes this series look entirely forgettable, and that's a damn shame. Art and animation took a backseat here, and while I'm pretty lenient when the story can actually pull through, I felt the direction here was also lacking, and as I'm reviewing the anime itself, not the source material, this was hampered by that aspect. If you can really immerse yourself and are looking to break from the traditional anime, I'd say this is worth a look. Yuri Is My Job had a plethora of issues that somehow came together to make it better than the sum of its parts. On paper, it felt like it would be a lighthearted show, with Yuri romance to tie over the nerds, too insecure to even picture a man in a relationship. But that's not what we got. From the outset, this show had some middling comedy that missed more than it hit, and a lot of cringy drama fueled only because the characters refused to clear up any misunderstandings at any point. It took about 6 episodes to really find its footing and even get to the fabled Yuri promised in the title, so it's a slow burn that I'm not entirely convinced is worth sitting through for the payoff. Mostly because this doesn't really feel like romantic tension, but petty bickering about ancient problems that barely impact the main cast in the current story. The halfway point is when any sort of romance could actually begin, so be aware on that front if you're going into this expecting Yuri on par with Bloom Into You or Adachi Shimamura, pretty much anything like that. The relationship drama isn't bad per se, but definitely mishandled in how it's presented to be the most frustrating part of this anime, because it's not even that compelling. Cute characters, decent animation for the genre and style they're going for, but ultimately not really worth the time. If you're hardcore into Yuri or desperate for some needlessly drawn out relationship drama peppered with a few jokes, this might be up your alley, but if you're looking for an easygoing rom-com, yeah, this isn't it. Don't go into it with those expectations. Yeah, I'll be honest, I dropped a Galaxy Next Door, which begs the question, why the hell did I place it up here if I dropped it? Doesn't that mean it's bad? You didn't even get through the whole show. Well, I think it's worth saying that just because I dropped a show, doesn't mean I thought it was awful or irredeemable. This was honestly pretty okay, but I found it a bit dated since the plot feels reminiscent of anime from the early 2000s. You know, what with that whole hot girl secretly being an alien getting together with a mangaka for plot-contrived reasons, and it spends most of its time about these two just being together and living a pretty mundane life, rather than exploring its core concept. Yeah, it's pretty much a standard rom-com with a gimmick to draw audiences in, and the barely qualifying humor and milquetoast chemistry between the two leads didn't exactly capture my heart. However, there is a clear market for this anime. People who like romance anime can binge this when it's left to public consciousness in a season or two, and will probably find it enjoyable then. Some anime just don't hold up in the week-to-week basis viewing model seasonal anime demands. And that pretty much summarized my experience with it. After a few episodes, I couldn't bring myself to care about the minimalist plot and characters I could see anywhere else. If you're looking for a fairly unremarkable rom-com that's easy on the comm, this could be worth a look, I guess. The Dangers in My Heart was on the better end in terms of rom-coms, but ultimately met the unfortunate fate of being in the same season as Tonikaku Kawaii on the comedy side, and Insomniacs After School on the romance side. So it's down here, but barely. because in terms of angle and characters, it's on the more memorable side of the spectrum. This guy's murder fixation could have easily been edgy and pretty much killed this series, but it frames it in a cringy light with even some self-awareness on his part, so it treats him more like an introvert with macabre interests. Now, the girl's ditzy personality is a lot more common in anime, but I think the fact that she's a popular girl who's taken an interest in this guy because they always end up in situations together makes for an organic relationship. The thing is, this is an incredibly slow-burning show. It's more comedy and cute romantic tensions than actual romance. And this is just me, but I get the feeling it wants to be more romance focused, but it can't because that would pretty much kill the main joke, that the guy's too shy and the girl's too ditzy to notice. So, it drags it all out. Animation wasn't something too appealing here, as it erred on the safe side with basic presentation, boring colors, and not really much of an artistic sense. The first episode tries harder than the rest, and it fell off from there. If you're looking for another odd couple comedy, this isn't a bad choice. Isekai really had a chance this season, and the reason why Raeliana ended up at the Duke's Mansion was a serious contender. A Korean manhwa about a college student murdered, ending up reincarnated in a book she read as the principal plot device about to be murdered again, but now fighting against fate to stay alive. Yeah, I'd say it's pretty damn unique in terms of plot, and lacking a lot of the typical plot tropes we associate with Japanese isekai. On top of that, the direction and how the story is told visually gave it an edge, as the show is pretty damn artistic in how it presents information and cuts between scenes. But my main issues with this series is how flat the rest of the cast is, and ultimately it's an entirely story-driven series when it could have been so much more. Raeliana isn't a perfect character, but she has a lot of personality, and that was something I felt was lacking in the rest of the cast, dragging this down somewhat. On top of that, while the direction is good, the art itself isn't really the best, but between clean-looking animation and the story told visually, I'll take the latter, which this was. If you're looking for a different type of isekai, definitely check this out. If there wasn't such stiff competition for the upper spots, this could have ended up there pretty easily. Yeah, I'll just come out and say it. I dropped Osama Ranking's latest side story romp this season despite me loving the original series. And the answer to why is pretty simple. I watched Osama Ranking because of the story and Boji's journey. Side stories are fine and all, but in this format and in place of a sequel series, I think it just couldn't hold my interest. I mean, no diss against this. What I made it through was pretty decent, but there's other series I had to watch that actually had a plot that wasn't set in stone by this point where it was taking place. So yeah, check it out if you're absolutely starved for Osama Ranking content, but I'd say just wait until the second season comes out. Now we're moving on to series that just didn't quite cut it for me. These had a few issues holding them back, and are just not things I tell people to check out because either their animation, plot, or execution was not there. And hey, sometimes it's all three. So let's take a look. Aristocrat's otherworldly adventure in a generic isekai world is our latest ripoff of Mushoku Tensei, with zero of the intrigue or character growth that had. I don't really like throwing around the word generic when I'm talking about anime, but not a single thing in this was original. The main character has zero personality, his self-sacrifice was a punchline, and the series goes out of its way to not just mock any tension or trouble the characters face, but then have the main character swoop in and solve it like any other poorly written isekai trash. This is the product of seeing what else is popular and letting it influence your ideas, as the magic system just solves whatever problems the main dude needs, and we'll just hand wave his OP-ness by the gods all blessed him super hard. Yeah, fuck off. He automatically gets the status and love of girls to fit in with the fantasy, and every fight's trivial to the point it's a joke. Is it meant to be that way? One would hope, but unfortunately it wasn't really funny, and the absurdity of these situations never really has a true punchline to say it's comedy, especially when the series is primarily an action and romance one sprinting headlong down the harem route without a single glance back. Want a better version of this anime? Watch the original, Mushoku Tensei, because that actually has a story instead of a bunch of borrowed tropes cobbled together. I couldn't get very far into the legendary hero is dead because I felt like it was grinding the same two jokes into the ground so much I was worried it'd spark another conflict in the Middle East by striking oil. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but dude does some random pervy acts in the middle of a conversation and gets physically assaulted for it. Or how about this gem? Everyone underestimates him, but his stupid plan always works to comedic effect. The writing from this series felt about on par with early Fairy Tail and other shonen manga from that time period. It didn't really look like it was going to improve by the time I hit the third episode, so I dropped it. That mixed with a squandered premise by focusing on how awful the main dude is, peppered with all this horniness that makes it feel like a series that teenagers would just love, at least until they climb out of their mother's basements long enough for the sun to burn away the layers of acne. There's better comedies, fantasy, and hell, even ecchi shows out there than this, so go watch those instead. Okay, Kawaii Sugi Crisis I also dropped, not because it was offensive, but because of just how inoffensive it was. This series had one setup and punchline it hits over and over again. That being some animal is cute and the aliens lose their mind over how cute it is. Yeah, that could have carried an episode or two, but I wanted to blow my brains out when I realized there was 12 episodes of this shit. Look, I get enough cute cat videos on TikTok. I don't really need an anime trying to predict my reactions on top of that. So bad, samey humor, stiff animation, poor art direction, and a missed opportunity by hyper-focusing on the least interesting aspect of this series. Am I being hard on it? You bet, because while this was tolerable, there's other series out there that hit the cuteness overload genre of comedy way better. As it is, this one lacks a solid reason for me to keep watching. So, I didn't. Wow, Mahou Shoujo Magical Destroyers was an actual disappointment. Going into this one felt like it would be something special, and I stuck it out more than most other series I've dropped. Like, I wanted to love this anime after the first episode, but ultimately I just couldn't do it anymore after around episode 6, when I realized that all the plot and zaniness this one built up in said first episode wasn't gonna amount to a damn thing. Story? Who cares about that when we can have a sex, drug, and violence addict going on wacky misadventures with a nerd who takes himself way too seriously? In a strange twist, this series took the wrong aspects of itself too seriously, and the other aspects it should have not seriously enough. The week-to-week random problems they find themselves dealing with just didn't gel, and that's a problem when this packs the same manic energy as a Trigger or Gainax anime, by not allowing the characters to be as invested in this world as they should be. Or hell, at least go over the top with the action like they did in the first episode. Rather, it just spends its time mucking about for way too long, to the point that you ultimately wonder if it had a point to begin with. Want something like this? Rewatch Kill la Kill. That's about it. Another case of wasted potential with an isekai. Summoned to another world for a second time, sat on the fence for a while on being junk food or too dull to continue it, before finally falling over onto the waste of time side. You know what's worse than an isekai protagonist? One who's so overconfident in how OP he is because he's done it all before. This was ripe for a subversive take on the genre, or hell, even a parody. But rather it just shoved this guy who knew what to expect into essentially an abridged version of his prior adventure. And that felt like an extra absolute waste of my time, because now we don't even get real introductions to his traveling companions or the world. On top of that, the color palette gave this series a cutesy slice of life vibe when it was clearly trying to go for action and adventure, with animation that falls on the lazier side by using simplistic character models to make movements easier to accomplish. The title might give you the impression there's a gimmick here, but really it's just the second half to an adventure when we're missing the first. So there's really no reason to watch this over any other isekai on the market. Literally none. So maybe kill two birds with one stone and watch Mushoku Tensei again, since I already recommended that. Definitely not plugging that because the second season starts in a few weeks. Well, that's it. Spring is dead and buried. The shows that were bad left a pretty nasty impression, but luckily they were the fodder that made the gems stand out so much more. Series that defied genres and a ton of solid rom-coms to fill out the season. And thinking about it, that's a few in a row now, making me question if we're entering the rom-com arc of anime. Either way, what did you think about this season? What shows did I miss that you liked? Leave your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear them. But for now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description. And if you really want to support me and, I don't know, maybe vote on what I'm going to watch next season, head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to HonorWolf01, Robin DBL, Samuel Chen, and Shrieken for their continued support. Thanks for watching.